I think the pre-rut is a very misunderstood time, but it's an incredible time to hunt a mature buck. You know, I could add another point here, and I think I will. While we're filming right here, I'm just gonna make myself a note, just target buck and core buck. But the point...
Add a T to different in number 5 as well. Sorry.
Okay, it's Dylan. Sorry. This is Dylan's job. He spends like 5 minutes like correcting every one of my whiteboards. So we only spent 4 minutes. That was a problem. But bottom line is the pre-rut is an incredible time to hunt it. It's very misunderstood. It's huge opportunity. And I put target and core buck over here because if you have a buck that's hanging around your land, it's within an hour of when the sun sets, within an hour of daybreak, even if it's in the dark, you know he's close. If you have bucks that are coming on your property in the middle of the night, they're far away. And a lot of people think that they're just nocturnal. No, they're coming from a long ways away. They're always daylight somewhere. Doesn't mean they move around all day, acres and acres and acres, but it means they're on their feet during daylight and they're killable. They're just not moving a lot. Bottom line is, that's when you wait till the peak rut. Pre-rut is when bucks are ready, does aren't necessarily. They're really starting to get active, make rub scrapes, and then all of a sudden, things change. Does come into heat. They breed 1 or 2 in their own little area, their own little secure core area. Then it becomes hard to breed a doe. They range out, and that's when those non-core bucks come in. But we're talking about core bucks. They're the most patternable. They're right on your property. They haven't left the land during the peak rut and really looking. There is a definite change. And what I mean by that is you go through hunting season, people start saying, wait, there's a lot of bucks moving around at night. There's a lot of rubs and scrapes popping up. I just saw a buck chasing a doe. 2 bucks are fighting. They spar all October. They're always pestering does, and they make rubs and scrapes consistently the entire month of October. I think a lot of people look at pre-rut. Well, pre could be September. Pre could be October, even though the peak rut's not till November. Pre-rut is a defined time of the rut. If you look up my 2018 book, and it was all-weather whitetails, I go through and I break down all phases of the entire hunting season, but all phases of the rut, including the pre-rut, rut lockdown, peak rut, post-rut, second rut, third rut. There is a defined moment at each one of those times, and the pre-rut is one of those. There's a definite change. What I mean by that is, sure, bucks are making rubs or scrapes. Sure, bucks are chasing does. They do that all October anyways, here and there. Bucks are fighting. They're always sparring. They even get a little intense at times, depending on the buck's attitude and personality. But the oldest bucks in the neighborhood do not wander around mid-morning, mid-afternoon, middle of the day, during the daylight, until it gets to the pre-rut. That's when you know the pre-rut. In fact, our number one sign around here where we have water holes is when you see bucks hitting water holes at 10 a.m. sometime in mid-morning, then you know the pre-rut has started. But until that time, doesn't matter how many rubs and scrapes there are, how many mature bucks you see moving around in the middle of the night, how much chasing you see, until you see mature bucks during the daylight. The oldest bucks in the neighborhood, that might be 3 in your area, that might be 2, that might be 7. The bottom line is they're moving around during the daylight, and there's a definite change. It's a switch. It changes instantly. You need to change. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of great opportunity hunting afternoon setups where you're hunting food sources, small food sources. I had someone mention that they've been doing really well. We recommend a lot of small pass-through clover plots, and that's what he's been hunting right now. He's doing really well watching bucks just cruise by, going to a major food source. He's not spooking out the major food source, not spooking out the bedding. Great afternoon sit. We've enjoyed some afternoon sits. Dylan and I were on a small food source, a just pass-through plot where it's a base of clover. It'll be all clover next year. And we had a really nice 3-year-old 8-point come by. It was an awesome hunt. Dante sat there a night or two, a few nights later. He actually saw a bow out in the field. He saw 2 bucks run by. Didn't know why they were running. Some does and fawns, so it's a very active spot, but it's all food related and afternoon related. But you need to change. What I mean by that, this is an incredible time to hunt a morning monster. Mature bucks move a lot more in the pre-rut. I've experienced and shot them during the morning hours than they do in the afternoon hours. So you probably double or triple the amount of time that they're on their feet in the morning. It's cooler, quieter, fewer hunters in the woods. I think obviously bucks move around during the middle of the night because they have no fear. Now what if we could hunt at night and didn't hunt during the daylight? Couldn't be on the land during the daylight. Think about it. Difference of night or day, but to them there'd be a difference of pressure during the nighttime and not during the daylight. That would get them moving around during the daylight. I think a lot of that's pressure related. Think about that. It's a different concept. The point is that During the morning hours, during the pre-rut, they move a lot more, and that gives you a lot more opportunity. I focus on bedding areas, backside of bedding areas, between doe bedding areas. Getting in and out in the morning away from food. You don't want to walk through food because that's where the deer are at. They're on the edge of those food sources, staging areas. Sometimes does bed in staging areas. That's why staging areas are so hard to hunt. So you're going around that area, coming in a back door, and getting into a spot where you can let deer come back to you. And if you do it right, what's crazy is you won't see those right at daybreak. They're not running through. That's a bad setup, bad hunting area, bad design. You're too close to a parking area if you're on public land. You need to get back in further on public land or private. It could be around the backside of your 30-acre chunk of cover. And that's all you have. The deer are working their way back there, and you see them at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, not 6:30 a.m., 7 a.m., quarter after 7. They're working their way back. That's when you know it's a pre-rut too, and that's how you hunt in the pre-rut, and that's how you have to change. More opportunity in the morning, and you can go right into an area where you think a mature buck might be bedding, get on the back side, wait for him to come back to you. However, if you're going in there, hanging a new set, using a climber, and it's loud stand, you might not see anything, because once you spook deer, they're going to hear you. If they're on a food source 300 yards away, like on a 30-acre parcel, they're on the food side on the front side of the parcel, on the front side of the cover, and you make a bang, you're going up a tree and you're loud and it's quiet out in the morning, they're probably going to hear you. So you have to hunt pre-hung sets, get in there quietly, sneak up, don't make a sound, let the deer come back to you. Folks, it's time for the rut, and that means you need to check out my rut web class. It'll help you navigate the entire rut. But more importantly, QuietKat is one of our important partners, and through that partnership, they've offered to clients, people that contact us, an incredible discount and opportunity to buy a new QuietKat. Look for an email that you can contact and the contact information in the description, but I really want to pass that off to you. We don't do that very often, but I want to make sure you guys don't miss out if you're looking and in the market for a new QuietKat. Evening is decent. You can see an uptick in evening activity, but if they're really active in the morning and they settle down about 11 or 12, don't be surprised if they're not moving until after daylight and into the darkness. So evening is okay. I'm not saying not to hunt in the evening. You'll see a little increase in percentage, but boy, the flip is on, and the morning is so good. That's when you need to hunt. That's when you need to be in the woods. A lot of people say, well, I only hunt afternoons. I don't have any morning sets. You have to have morning sets. Afternoon, evening relates to food, morning relates to bedding. When you have those defined two different stand locations, then you know you're doing a great job. Number 4, midday. This is not the time for sitting dark to dark in the same stand. For one, deer aren't moving during the midday. Mature bucks aren't moving during the midday in the pre-rut. They're very active in the morning. Sometime around 11 or 12, they really shut down. A friend of mine, Tim, real good friend. It was, I believe, 2004, and we saw like 26, 27 bucks the end of October, early November, 4 days in a row. Very cold time. It was in the teens, 20 in the morning, every morning in Wisconsin. And we enjoyed a great set. But you know what? Out of all those bucks and all those sightings we saw, we didn't see one buck between 11 o'clock and 1:30. Why? Because they're all bedded down. They had a huge active morning, and the does aren't necessarily coming into estrus. The bucks are ready. The does aren't necessarily ready. They're going to be any day, and that's when it flips a lot of times the lockdown, because there's so many does ready. And we'll talk about that in another video, but there's so many does coming into heat that every buck gets invited to the party. There's not a lot of reason for them to move around. There's a doe here, there's a doe there. And that's that peak rut timing. You know, on a flip back, you know, in that change and talking about, you know, when the rut begins is another video, but you have to be very cautious, because every state they don't necessarily do so, but every state can figure out when the rut begins differently. And it even can go by county to county. If you look down in Georgia, for example, at a rut map of a state rut map of when the peak rut is, it'll be different colors all across the board. Why is it? Because different counties or groups of counties tabulate when the rut begins and when does are being bred differently than the other one. For example, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a state where it'll show a later rut than actually is, but some of these states don't consider a second rut. So if you have a blip in activity and 15-20% of the does are being bred in early December, they average that in with the peak rut of, say, early November. And now it shows a later peak rut because you're figuring in all those does that come into estrus in December. I hope that makes sense. So instead of an accurate peak rut window and a second rut, two different rut time periods with a pretty good slowdown in between, you tabulate it all together. Now it skews the averages. Makes it look like there's no second rut. Makes it look like the peak rut is later because you're blurring those two together. It moves the peak rut back by a week. So that's one huge way. If you look at some of these rut maps, you'll look from literally Alabama state line, Georgia. Going to Alabama, it's one timing. You literally go to the state line. It's a drastic difference on the other side of the state line. You can see that from state to state. It might even be Kentucky and Ohio, I think, is one where it's very drastic between the two. Alabama, Georgia is another one. Why is that? It's because they look at it differently. So if you go by state actual rut maps, you're all off the chart. You're going to be wrong. You're going to be inconsistent. And so the rut happens at the same time every year. That's one thing that everything gets right. It's no different than horse breeders that actually travel and breed horses based on when they're actually coming into estrus, based on that they're going to do it at the same time every single year, and they can plan a travel route with artificial insemination. So they can do that and plan it no different than deer. It's the same exact thing as far as that timing goes. So think about that in a timing. The pre-rut isn't actually when does are starting to come in estrus right on that day. The pre-rut begins when bucks are being very active during the daylight. That's how you can tell. And what's interesting about that is that while those bucks are ready, those does are about to be ready, there's a huge opportunity for you, and part of that opportunity comes in the form of two different stands. They're not moving around during the middle of the day. You shouldn't be sitting in the same stand all day, because if you're sitting in a morning stand, perfect. But what happens in the afternoon, evening, when all those bucks are leaving their bedding areas and going to food? That means your morning great stand that was a 10 out of 10 is now a dud in the afternoon. And this is kind of what that looks like. You look at a bedding area over here, that's kind of that movement. They're all over the place in that bedding area. Lots of opportunity. You just need to stand on the outside based on the wind. You have a great chance of that buck going right in front of you and getting a great shot on him. Then there's limited movement to a food source in the afternoon. Yeah, you might hunt here, you might hunt there, but it's not as guaranteed. When they're back in that bedding area, they're going to move all over the place. They feel safe. Do they come to that food source before dark, or don't they? Who knows? That's the difference with the pre-rut. Once you get into the rut lockdown and peak rut, you don't know when they're coming off a doe. You don't know when they're moving. They could be moving all day. That's where you sit in that perfect X of movement. That perfect X might be right here, where those trails cross in between food and bedding. You might see bucks all day long in a location like that. But they're not moving through that area right now in the pre-rut. There's a definite change. The pre-rut is happening. As far as timing goes, look to the north, beginning more 20th, 24th, based on weather. And what I mean by that, again, the weather is not pushing does into heat. It's pushing bucks on their feet. That's the difference. If it's 80 degrees, windy, in the upper Midwest, they're not going to be moving. Oh, heck, even northern Indiana, northern Illinois, northern Ohio, they're not going to be moving. I look for that rut to begin in the north, 20th, 24th, somewhere around there with cold weather. Not necessarily, again, that does are coming into estrus. And then you move into the more center part of the country. Let's say that line, West Virginia, Kentucky, over into Missouri, southern Iowa, over into Kansas. That might be more November 1st, 5th. I know southern Ohio is about a week later than we are up here, more like 1st November is a pre-rut, where you start to see this type of light switch on. Again, there's going to be a lot of rubbing and scraping, chasing. That doesn't mean that the rut has started until those mature bucks are moving during daylight. As you move further south, you expect a later start to that into early November. And then when you get into the south-southeast, it's kind of a crapshoot. It can happen anytime between November and February. Then that's when you hunt those individual doe family groups. You know this old doe comes into heat in this area because you saw her running around like crazy and being chased on December 18th the year before. She's going to come in with within a few days of that this year. So make sure you go hunt in that same spot, but always hunt by the weather, because the weather is going to guide you to success. All that breeding will still take place whether there's good weather or not, but it happens at night or the daytime. That's where you see rutting activity during the daylight. Again, not that more does are being bred or they're coming into estrus. It's just pushing bucks on their feet. And they might even move the same amount of time during the daylight as they did before when it was all under the cover of darkness. So it might not even be that they're putting more miles on, because they can only run so much. They only have so much energy each day. The difference is they're making those movements during shooting hours versus non-shooting hours. Huge opportunity in the pre-rut. Very definitive. It's very easy to pattern an old buck. In fact, what I find, the older he becomes, the more easy he is to pattern, because he's very rigid in his movements, no different than an old man. Very rigid in daily patterns. The problem is he's very wary, very experienced, and very reactive to hunting pressure. So if you can hunt him without applying too much hunting pressure, chip away here in the bedding area, chip away here in a food source, always remembering your access and your wind direction when you're on stand, then you can just chip away at him and you'll connect within several sits of being cautious, knowing his pattern, because again, when he's older, he's easier to pattern, and the pre-rut is the ultimate #1 time to pattern him and put your tag on him each and every fall. I appreciate you guys watching the YouTube channel, but I don't know if everyone knows everything that we have to offer, whether it's on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, our website, our WHS Wildlife Blends, our seed company. Also Instagram you can check out. I'm very active on Instagram, putting strategies on there, photos of what we do every day. Much more active there than Facebook. But our seed, web classes, books, clients, articles. I have over 600 articles on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, everything whitetail strategy. Of course, we have hats on there, and then make sure to check us out on Instagram again. But lots of stuff to offer. We're always coming out with new things, and this isn't the end of it. We have more things coming soon. Make sure to check us out.